David Birner, and I've been in higher education now for just about 5 years, not very long. I'm old, so I lived for a long time working independently, working internationally before I got into the education world. I'll just try to talk loud. If you guys back there, if you would like me to use the microphone, let me know and I'll use the microphone. Otherwise, it's a little easier to just talk. But my role, I work at Concordia University. Have any of you heard of Concordia yet? Some. Okay. Concordia, let me start here. 20 years ago, a man by the name of Dr. John Buk came to, actually went to Estonia, then came to Kyiv. Do any of you know that name? Dr. John Buk. So you're mostly first and second year here, right?
Yeah.
Hey.
Good. How are you? You can just wait. I'll talk to Diala for a little bit. So the reason I know Diala is because she does know Concordia. She came with her colleagues to Concordia 2 years ago. Is it 2 years already?
2 years already.
Wow. And we had a great time. Good. So you can help me talk about Concordia a little bit. But let me go. I was going back to Dr. Buk. Dr. John Buk was the president of Concordia University in Wisconsin. Anybody knows? The state of Wisconsin is right next to a big water. You know what the big water is? No? Lake, big lake. Not Lake Superior, but close. Michigan. Lake Michigan. It's right at the bottom of Lake Michigan. If you look at the map, right in the middle of the U.S. is Chicago. You go up north just a little bit, and that's Milwaukee, right on the lake, and right just by Milwaukee is where Concordia is. So Dr. Buk came here, and because of his interest, and because of the interest of the Romanovskys, who you know here, Wisconsin International University, Ukraine, was started here. So, you and I have the same taproot. You know what a taproot is? We'll talk about taproots. A taproot is the main root of a tree. So you got a big tree, and it comes down onto the trunk. But there's one big root that goes down under the ground that draws all its nourishment. And we call that, kind of the taproot, what makes the tree a tree. Our taproot is shared. We have the same, we come from the same taproot. So Concordia and WIUU already have a connection that happened long before you were here, happened before I was here, but today we're here because of that start that we had together back 20 years ago. So in the last 2 years, we've been working to bring the communities, the schools of WIUU and Concordia University together a little bit closer. That's why Diala and her colleagues were with us in Concordia to get to know that school. We'd like to have more students from Kyiv come to live and work and study together with our students. We'd love to have a few of our students from Concordia come here. And that's why I'm here now. My role in Concordia is the director for international education. So what does that mean? At our university, we have students who come from 35 different countries around the world who join together with the majority of North American students who are gathered at Concordia to study. One of the things that I've noticed in just my short 5 years is the difference in educational models. You know, I've thought that higher education, university education, would be pretty much the same anywhere you go in the world, but I don't think so. The biggest difference I notice are from the students who come from China and the students who come from India. And what they find very difficult when they first get to Concordia is the way that students speak, the way that students talk in class, and they also find it very different the way faculty members, the professors, interact with students. So the students from India and from China are used to sitting in a class and taking notes. Have any of you traveled to China? Have you been into any schools in China? Yeah. See what if it was like when I've visited schools. It's been very quiet, but occasionally then the professor or the teacher will ask students to recite something, and then does one student recite?
Stand up.
The whole class.
The whole class will recite, but he will pick a person from the list, either or by himself, and they will recite a part of the material.
Right, and they'll cite the material. Yeah, so it's very much professor driven. So the professor will give assignments, and then the whole class will speak together to repeat what the professor has said. And then, as you said, then one will be called on to repeat what was taught to them. So it was kind of generally speaking, very generally speaking, the model was the professor has the knowledge, the professor has the information, the student, being a good student, mimics the professor, copies the professor. And the copying of a professor is the highest form of flattery for a student-professor relationship in some countries of the world. When students get to Concordia, it's different from that. The highest form of flattery is when the student gets the idea, when the student gets the knowledge, when the student thinks independently. And so we have differences when students come to Concordia are not accustomed to thinking independently. They're trying to figure out what does the group think together. And when they find it a big difference. Most students like comparing the two different models of education. But it becomes very difficult when it comes to writing papers. What students get in trouble with is what we would call in the U.S. plagiarism. Do you have that word?
Yeah.
So what does it mean?
Copy.
Right, to copy. Right, to copy and is it
past, yeah, like and say that it's yours and you did it.
Yeah, so if you copy and paste and say it's yours, turn it in. Professors now have enough software that they can take your paper and scan, right? Do they do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do that in the U.S. too. So you can find if you've cited a work and you haven't recorded it, then that's plagiarism. For many of our students from India, we're not accustomed to that. But Indian students were expected to copy and paste from the masters, from the ones who they were learning, and it wasn't necessary to document. So when students would come from that education system into our education system, there is often miscommunication between the professors, the students. The professor will think our student is cheating. The student thinks, oh, I'm doing exactly the right thing, and you get into a confrontation. So from the international perspective, that's the world that I live in. We have students then who are coming from all different kinds of backgrounds into higher education. And it's when you get that mix of students that you start to generate new ideas. You start to develop networks that expand around the world. It's a very valuable experience, but it's got the education systems all have a very different taproot. They come from different histories, different traditions. So I'm going to talk a little bit just about about higher education in the United States and give you just a look, kind of a big picture overview of the different taproots, the different strands of education in the United States. And let's see, let me just start. I'm going to write just a few things. I got 3 things to say on, I've got 3 parts that I'm going to talk about, 3 points for each one of those parts. So the first part is just understanding a little bit about higher education in the United States. One of the big differences in the U.S. from other countries around the world is that in the United States, higher education has very little government control. Has very little government control. You might think that going to university or going to a college in the U.S., it would be the same in every place. It's not. It varies a lot. You can go from a small community college that has 2 years of vocational training and is all they offer, all the way up to a Harvard, a Yale, a Stanford that has tens of thousands of students and a whole number of course offerings. So there are the bookends, and then there's everything in between. So where did they come from? How did that start? Why is it so different? So in the very first strand, the first taproot of higher education. Well, first of all, we'll just say to you, this is we call them IHEs, so institutes. Institutes of higher education. That means colleges, universities. So IHEs. So they all come from a little bit different taproot. So the very first one comes from the 1700, about 1730 to 1770. And when did the United States, did anyone here know your history when the United States was formed? What year?
About 42 years.
Yeah, it's about right around this time, about 1776. Before the United States was formed, there were the beginnings of higher education, and so it was kind of in a colonial period from those people who were colonizing the United States, starting it, and their taproot for education came from liberal arts in Europe. Liberal arts, and one of the biggest reasons for higher education was the religious aspect of community life. So in Europe, we had people who were graduates of Cambridge, of Oxford, of universities that had been around for many, many years, that had in their taproot the preparation of young people for serving religious communities. People for general knowledge, for leadership in aristocracies, in the bureaucracies, in government agencies, broadly speaking. That was where the first schools started in the United States, before the United States was even begun. When the colonies were started, the people who were beginning the schools were primarily interested in the religious aspect of their communities. So that's where the taproot went all the way back to Europe. And that stayed in place until about it went from about 1780s to about 1850. Then there were began to be state-supported, state-sponsored HIEs. IHEs. Gosh, I can't hear. So what happened within the during this time is that the higher education was really shaped by what was going on in the country, and so as the colonies were established, as the states started coming together, they began to realize that the leadership for that growth, the leadership for that merger, was coming through the institutes for higher education. At the same time, as the states were being formed, there was a real suspicion of centralized power. So as the United States began to shape as a group of different states, no one wanted to give up their power and give it to someone else. So they started to oversee little parts of the higher education state by state by state. Consequently, the universities developed different. Let me give you some examples of these state-sponsored schools. Would be like our University of Michigan. Would be like the what are some of the others here? Let me just check my notes. The University of Michigan, Ohio State, Cornell University. These were universities that were actually started by the government giving grants of land and saying, if on this land you build a university, the profits of that university could go back to the state. So it became a business generation at a state level. By the way, I didn't mention the tap roots. The universities that have tap roots up here would be universities like Harvard, Princeton, those William and Mary. Those are big internationally known universities that grew out of this colonial era. Then we have a lot of state-sponsored universities that still are funded by the state, but not funded by the United States government, but by the local state governments. And then we have another third stream here that came in the late 1800s. These are just rough dates, but it probably up to the probably just past the Second World War, and those would be research. Research universities. Apparently, Germany had already developed their higher education systems based more around research than around the liberal arts and such. So that caught on in the United States, and we have huge research universities now that produce so many of our products in medicine, in agriculture, in business, and you know all of those. MIT is a big research university. University of Minnesota is another great research university. You could probably go through and list the kinds of universities that come out of the research model. But the point of this is that out of these three different types of universities draw their identity and draw their personality from the taproot from which they came. And if you want to understand the personality of a university, you kind of have to learn its taproot and where it came from, because that starts to shape the type of education that you might expect from a university. So let's see. Those are the three taproots. Any comments on this? Where does higher education in Ukraine fit? I don't know. It's got there's a hint. But yeah, go ahead.
It was started by Martin Luther.
There you go. It started by Martin Luther.
When? 17th century?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was in. Actually, it was in about 500. This year is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. So this is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation that was started by Martin Luther. This becomes a little bit important because as we go from here, you'll start to see a personality emerge. Anyone know where the Reformation actually had its beginning, had its start? Not France. No? I know this is a business class, not a history class, but I had to look all this stuff up too. But Germany, absolutely. You're right. It did. It started in Wittenberg, Germany. And in that little town of Wittenberg, can you guess where the seeds of the Reformation started, that seed of that taproot? Give you a hint, it starts with a U. University. Yeah. It started in the university. It started in the university because Martin Luther was a professor in the university, and his thoughts on learning were much different. Remember how we started our conversation about different models of learning? Martin Luther's model of learning went back to anchor in the writings of people who've gone years and years before. He went back into the Holy Bible scriptures, went back to that kind of writing, and he took those concepts and applied them to individual people. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But we're going to, out of this taproot of religious education, there are three models. And I'm going to show you those three different models here so you understand a little of the taproot. Remember, our taproot here goes back to the liberal arts, religion. Then it goes to Lutheran Reformation, about around 1500s. So we'll do one model of religious education. Can be drawn by a circle, and I'm going to use this as Christian education. So there's one model that was very prevalent for centuries, and it still is today, and that's a model that has a fence all the way around it. It's a closed community. So in order to get into that community, one needs to be of the same faith. One needs to in this case, in the cases we're talking about Christian religion history. And in this case, the borders of the university, the borders of the school would be very, very tight. Which means that people who go into the community have to be the same, have to think the same, have to understand things the same. Can you think of a model of a closed community, a closed education system today? We have some in the United States. I went to one. I don't know if you know you may not know the name.
Seminary.
Yeah. So.
Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted.
No, but you did. But that's right. It's seminary. So do you know what a seminary is? Yeah. So tell me what a seminary does.
Wait, I thought that's symmetry. Sorry.
Oh, not cemetery. Not cemetery. What a cemetery is where you go when you're done with everything else. But on your way to that.
That's sort of a close situation too.
But that is close. It's got very tight. Yeah.
It's about theological education.
Yes, exactly. It's about theological education. So, for example, I did undergraduate. My undergraduate was in a 2-year. I went to 2 years to a 2-year college, got an Associate of Arts degree in liberal arts, and then I went to a senior college and I got a bachelor's degree, all in liberal arts, a little bit in religion, a little bit in philosophy, a little bit in theology. But then I had to go to get a master's degree. My master's degree, I went to a seminary. It's close to cemetery, but seminary. Seminary is where church workers typically are trained. The Catholic Church has seminaries for their priests. The Orthodox Church has seminaries for their priests, for their leaders. Churches throughout the United States have higher education, and it means that those who go into that education, if they don't think the same when they go into that education, they're likely going to think the same when they come out. So it's a very closed, very prescribed, and a solid education because it has a very strong taproot back to its origins, very strong identity. That's one model for higher education. Then there's another model. And that model has pretty much the fence all the way around it, except it's open for a little bit. And it's open for a few people to come in from a different tradition, from a different way of thinking. So in the United States, we have a number of church, religious-related higher education institutions, such as, I'll just name one, is the Moody Bible Institute, for example. So the Moody Bible Institute, I know that because I have some colleagues who've gone there. Inside the Moody Bible Institute, most people are Christian, but every now and then they'll bring in others who may be of a little different theological persuasion, and they can come in through this way. And the thought is When people from the outside come in, they still have to conform to the boundaries that have been set, and they may have to profess similar rules and regulations, but there'll be people who come from a different taproot, who come from a different tradition. But there are fewer of those people in this model. Still, this model serves mostly the faithful from that community. And it's also very popular. A number of universities that come from this taproot started here and have progressed to this model. And then there's a third model. You probably already know what this one looks like. Can't even see that, but the third model is the boundaries are not that clearly defined. The boundaries, there's not a fence around the university. Inside the university, those who are leaders, those who are professors will come typically from this taproot up here. But the people who come into the university come from outside and come from all different traditions, all different taproots. And so you have any number of different people, any number of different traditions that are welcome into the community. But the community's identity comes not from those who have gathered in it as much as from those who are in the leadership positions. That third tradition is more accurately descriptive of Concordia's student body. So when I started out, I told you we have students from 35 different countries. We have students from every major religion that we know in the world. We have students with different ethnic backgrounds. We have students with a variety of different racial backgrounds. So we have students who come from all different traditions. But then where do we draw our identity and our purpose? That's one of the unique characteristics of American education, is that when you choose, and some of you, I hope, will choose to come to Concordia. We're going to talk about that later. We're hoping that we get students from WIUU who will spend a semester at Concordia. We're hoping we'll have students from Concordia spend a semester here sitting in these desks with you. We're hoping to have that kind of interaction. As we have that kind of interaction, what will make this kind of education different from an education you'd get in any other university? You probably cannot answer that question right now, but it's an important question, because where you study, how you approach your study makes a difference in how you begin to live your vocation, your life as you lead. So I'm going to go now to the last three things the last 3 points that I wanted to make here, and we'll use it out of this. So what might you find when you come into a Lutheran, into Concordia University? What you'll find are professors, are other students, are administrators who have a certain belief about the world. And when you have a certain belief about the world, you have a certain approach to the world. One of the things that's very, very strongly held in belief by the Lutheran tradition, which drove Martin Luther, was the idea that God created the world. This is an important point. So we think about God as creator. This is one point. Now there are a number of different points that can go under God the Creator, but when you think about being created, it means that there was a God, there was a purpose, that we didn't just happen. When you make something, when you create something, you work with intentionality. That means you concentrate on what it is that you're making, because whatever you're making, you're spending the time to make it. You want it to be good. You want it to work. Lutherans believe that God created not only the earth that we live on, but each and every person. That's a core belief. So when I'm talking to any one of you, I'm understanding that you are created. You had nothing to do with how you came into being. I was created. I had nothing to do with how I came into being. When you believe that other people have been created by one who's taken the time to shape you, to give you the mind that you have, to give you the skills that you have, when you see each person as a creation of God, that person looks very, very valuable. Very, very important. Very, very unique. Sorry, you can answer. Say hi for me. No. So when a professor is talking to people, he's not talking to students who he just wants to mimic, but he's talking to students who he believes or she believes are an important part of creation. That thought goes all the way back. You follow that taproot right into Martin Luther. And Martin Luther, at the start of the Reformation, what transformed societies, transformed politics, transformed university education, was the belief that every person has value. It's an important point. Not everyone understands that you have that value. But that's a core value for Lutherans. And so we go to the number 2 that Martin Luther said was so important, and that is vocation. Anyone know what a vocation is? Vocation? It's like an occupation. It's like an occupation. It's like a profession. It's like a professional, but a vocation is even deeper than that. A vocation is what you do with your entire life. And so Martin Luther said as a vocation that people live in a community and every person has a very specific skill set. And he said those who milk the cows milk the cows because God gave them that responsibility to feed the others. Those who fix their shoes are people who invest in the well-being of others. Those who work in the health professions have been given health professions to help others. Those who work in the service industries, the business industries, go through any industry, any profession, and see it as vocation, as the very special niche, the very special part of the world that you have been created for. That was a core piece that transformed how the whole Western civilization operates. Understand that piece is to understand the investment in higher education. And then finally, the third thing that Luther believed, and that you'd find today, I put just the word process, and that is that change, that each of us in our eras, that change is a process. So in your education is never finished. You may get a degree, but your education is a whole process of change. And so all the investment in you as a creation, all the investment in your role in the society in which you work, and all that investment will be a result in a continuous change as this, we'll say, as this tree grows for the next century. The taproot that feeds that is very important. So that's a little bit of a following the taproot for Concordia's identity, for what we believe in Concordia. Concordia is not the only university like that, by the way. But if you would go to MIT or to a research university, you could learn research. And learn research models, very important. You can go to a state-sponsored school and there'll be all kinds of students from all kinds of places and all kinds of faculty, and you'll be able to find little niches. The identity will be spread out pretty far. When you go to a university, a private university like Concordia, you'll find an intense focus on your individual skills and abilities. So I'm going to show you one little 2-minute clip. It's only 2 minutes on that our marketing team put together. And based on what I've told you about higher education in the United States, have a look at that and watch what the people look like, the facial expressions. Watch what you see and see what kind of message comes through from the identity of this university. Let's see if I can get this up here. And then we're going to be just about done in 2 minutes. That's all I have. hopefully you saw pictures in those pictures. You saw some of the results of young people whose lives have received an investment of faith, an investment of faculty, an investment of friends, and a look toward the future in what can be a very exciting vocation for young people in whatever world they're in. I hope you get a chance to think about joining that group of students, even if only for a short time, for a semester, so, or even, yeah, was it?
A week.
A week. So, and you can talk to Diala and to Julia, two Julias which we had. So we had a great time together, and they can tell you the real story you just heard from my perspective. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this. We look forward to doing more with you.